Have you ever stood in a place so old and so saturated with misery that it feels like the walls have memorized it? Not just remembered, but memorized, like a poem it recites to itself in the dark. I have. I used to think it was just a feeling, an overactive imagination fueled by peeling paint and dust motes dancing in flashlight beams. I don't think that anymore. I know now that some places don't just hold memories, they hold a consciousness. And the one I visited learned my name. My hobby, back then, was urban exploration. I wasn't a vandal or a thrill seeker in the traditional sense. I was a historian of forgotten things. I loved the silence of abandoned buildings, the stories left behind in a discarded shoe or a calendar still flipped to a forgotten month. My target was the Blackwood Pines Sanatorium, a sprawling relic deep in the woods that had been left to rot for 50 years. It was the white whale for explorers in my area, infamous for its bad vibes and local legends of spectral patients. I brushed it all off as campfire stories. My friend Marc was supposed to come with me, but he bailed at the last minute, citing a family emergency that I suspected was actually just a healthy dose of fear. I was arrogant. I figured it was his loss. Going alone meant I could take my time, soak in the atmosphere without interruption. I had my camera, a powerful flashlight, and a crowbar for any stubborn doors. I thought I was prepared for anything. The word prepared is a joke to a place like that. I found the building at the end of an overgrown service road, a skeletal giant of brick and slate being slowly devoured by the forest. Prying open the main entrance doors took all my strength. The wood swollen and warped. The moment I stepped inside, the air changed. It was heavy, still, and cold, carrying a sterile scent I couldn't place, like ancient chemicals. The doors, which had fought me so hard, swung shut behind me with a deafening boom that echoed through the vast, dark lobby. I spun around, my heart pounding. The wind, I told myself. It had to be the wind. But there wasn't a draft. Not a single leaf stirred on the floor. I pushed the thought down and moved deeper inside. The grand staircase was rotted through in places. So I stuck to the ground floor, my flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the gloom. I explored the old administrative offices, papers and patient files carpeting the floor like dry leaves. In the dining hall, upturned tables lay like sleeping animals. It was all beautifully decayed, exactly what I'd come for. Then I heard the first sound that I couldn't explain away. From the floor directly above me, a faint, rhythmic squeaking began. Squeak, roll, squeak, roll. It was the sound of a single rusted wheel turning slowly, like someone was pushing a medical cart or an old gurney down the hallway. I froze, listening. It continued for half a minute, tracing a path from one end of the hall to the other, before simply stopping. The silence that followed was somehow louder. Against my better judgment, I decided to find a safe way to the second floor. I found a sturdy-looking back staircase and made my way up, my footsteps unnervingly loud. The second floor housed the patient wards. Long, dark corridors stretched out, lined with identical doorways. I walked the length of the hall where I'd heard the sound. It was empty. All the gurneys were pushed up against the walls, thick with dust, their wheels frozen with rust. None of them could have moved. As I stood there, trying to reason it out, a smell hit me. It was sharp antiseptic, the unmistakable odor of a hospital. It grew stronger as I approached one particular room, so strong it made my eyes water. I shone my light inside. It was just another empty room, identical to the others, but the air was thick with that clinical smell. I took one step back out of the doorway, and it was gone, completely. The air in the hall was just musty and old again. My skin crawled. It felt like the building was toying with me, showing me things that weren't there, making me question my own senses. I should have left then. Every instinct was screaming at me to turn back, to get out into the sunlight. But a morbid curiosity, the explorer's curse, pushed me forward. I wanted to see the operating theaters. I found them in the West Wing. They were surprisingly well preserved. A massive surgical lamp hung over a rusted operating table, like a metal cyclops. Instruments lay scattered on trays, glinting in my light. I was taking a photo of the table when I felt a distinct, icy cold spot in the room. It was more than a draft. It was a profound absence of heat that felt like it was sinking into my bones. I backed away, sweeping my light across the room, and that's when I saw the reflection in the observation window gallery above. For a fraction of a second, my light had caught the silhouette of a head and shoulders, a shape looking down at me before it pulled back into the darkness. I yelled out, a stupid, reflexive "Who's there?" The only answer was the echo of my own voice, mocking me. That was it. I was done. I turned and ran, not even caring which way I was going, just needing to get out. I barreled down a hallway, hadn't been in before, and came to a set of double doors with faded paint on the glass. The sunlight ward. The children's wing. The air in here was different, heavier, sadder. The walls were covered in faded murals of cartoon animals whose painted smiles looked like grotesque sneers in the gloom. And then I saw the handprints. On the dusty pane of a large window overlooking the dead grounds, there were dozens of small, children's handprints. They weren't old and faded. They were sharp, clear, as if they'd been made just moments ago in the thick layer of dust. My breath hitched. From a dark corner of the room, something rolled silently across the floor and came to a perfect stop, touching the tip of my boot. I looked down. It was a single, blue glass marble. My mind just broke. I didn't scream. I didn't even breathe. I just turned and fled. I sprinted through the labyrinthine corridors, my own panicked gasps chasing me. I finally saw the faint outline of the main entrance doors and threw my entire body against them. They burst open, and I fell out onto the dead leaves, gulping in the clean, evening air. I scrambled back to my car, my lungs burning, not daring to look back at the dark, silent building that seemed to be watching me go. I never went back. I sold my camera gear and packed away my maps. The silence of my own home became my enemy, because sometimes, when I'm lying in bed, in the dead quiet of the night, I hear it. From the empty room down the hall, a faint, familiar sound. Squeak, roll, squeak, roll. But this time, it's not a gurney. It's the sound of a single, blue glass marble, rolling slowly across the wooden floor. Most people think of silence as an absence of sound, but it isn't. True silence, absolute silence, is something our brains are not equipped to handle. If you find a place that is truly, perfectly quiet, your mind will invent sounds to fill the void. I know this because I went looking for that perfect quiet. I was a fool. I thought I was searching for an absence, but what I found was a presence. A sound that had been waiting in the silence for a very, very long time. By trade, I was a sound artist. I didn't compose music. I captured atmospheres. I would travel to the most remote places on Earth, volcanic deserts, ancient forests, glacial caves, and record their unique audio signatures. My goal was to find the sound of a world without us. A friend in the armed forces told me about an ideal candidate. An abandoned DU-line station in the far northern territories, designated only as Site B, built during the Cold War to watch for Soviet bombers. It had been decommissioned in the late 80s and left to the merciless elements. It was miles from any town, accessible only by a long, arduous hike. It was perfect. The thought of capturing the pure, unpolluted sound of wind moving over decaying radar domes filled me with an almost religious excitement. I packed my best, gear binaural microphones, a multi-track field recorder, noise-oscillating headphones, worth more than my car, and spent 2 days trekking into that vast, empty landscape. When I finally saw it on the horizon, a cluster of white geodesic domes and concrete bunkers, it looked like a colony on a dead planet. It was beautiful, lonely, and silent. The main operations building was a concrete blockhouse, half buried in the tundra. Inside, it was a time capsule of Cold War paranoia. Banks of enormous computers with reel-to-reel tape drives lined the walls, all of them dark and dead. I set up my equipment in the center of the main command room, a space designed to listen for distant threats. The irony wasn't lost on me. For the first day, it was heaven. The only sounds were the ones I expected: the cry of the wind, the metallic groan of stressed metal, the soft hiss of my own recorder. The silence was so deep it felt physical, like a weight on my ears. That night, I huddled in my sleeping bag and put on my headphones to review the day's recordings. And that's when I heard it. Beneath the layers of wind and ambient noise was something else. A hum. It was incredibly low, a subsonic thrum, at the very edge of human hearing. Something my high-fidelity microphones were picking up with unnerving clarity. It wasn't random noise. It had a structure, a slow repeating pattern, like a coded message played at 1/10th speed. My first thought was equipment failure. A grounding issue, maybe interference from some hidden power source. I spent the entire next day troubleshooting. I checked every cable, rebooted every device, even tried setting up outside, far from the building. The hum was still there. It was on every recording. It wasn't my equipment. The sound was coming from this place. It was faint, but it was undeniably real. As the day wore on, I started to feel a strange pressure in my sinuses, a dull headache that wouldn't quit. The isolation began to press in on me, the vast empty landscape outside feeling less like a peaceful sanctuary and more like a cage. I tried to distract myself by exploring the rest of the station. I found living quarters with beds still made, a mess hall with plates on the tables. In one of the smaller, windowless communication hubs, I found something odd. The walls were lined with thick sheets of lead, not part of the original construction. It was crudely installed, as if in a panic. I had an unsettling thought. Was this to keep signals from getting in, or to keep something from getting out? The feeling of being watched, of some unseen intelligence residing here, began to take root in my mind. The hum on my recordings was getting clearer. It was still just a low-frequency drone, but it felt more complex now, the patterns shifting. It almost sounded like a voice, slowed down 1,000 times, gargling words from the bottom of an ocean. On the third night, everything changed. I was sitting in the dark, headphones on, trying to filter out the anomalous sound, when the hum suddenly surged. It wasn't just in the headphones anymore. I ripped them off my head, but the sound was still there. I could hear it with my own ears, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from the concrete floor, traveling up my legs and into my chest. The fillings in my teeth began to ache. The pressure in my skull was immense, a physical pain that made me gasp. I stared in horror at my recorder's display. The waveform was no longer a simple low-frequency line. It was a jagged, complex, and terrifyingly symmetrical pattern. It looked like an EKG, the heartbeat of something colossal. The sound filled the room, a deafening, silent roar that was more felt than heard. It was intelligent. I knew it with a certainty that defied all logic. This wasn't a natural phenomenon or a residual signal. It was a broadcast, and it felt ancient, powerful, and deeply, profoundly wrong. In that moment, I understood what the men who'd worked here had discovered. This station wasn't built to listen for bombers over the pole. It was built to listen to this, and then they had tried to silence it. I didn't even pack. I grabbed my emergency backpack and ran. As I burst out of the heavy door into the freezing night, a loud, metallic shriek tore through the air. I glanced up. The massive 20-ton radar dish on the roof, frozen in place for 30 years, was moving. It was turning, slowly, ponderously, its great metal face tracking me as I scrambled away into the darkness. I don't remember much of the journey back. It was a blind, panicked flight. I never reported what happened. Who would have believed me? I left thousands of dollars of equipment in that concrete tomb, and I've never once considered going back for it. I don't create sound art anymore. I can't stand the quiet. The doctors say I have severe tinnitus, but it's more than that. In any moment of near silence in a quiet car, in my bed late at night, I can still hear it. That faint, structured hum at the very lowest register of my hearing. It's not a memory. It's an echo from that place that followed me home. Or maybe the signal finally found a receiver it could lock onto. Me. We have this arrogant notion that our ruins are empty. We see a ghost town or an abandoned factory, and we think of it as a vacuum, a hollow space where life used to be. But nature is far more pragmatic. It never allows a space to remain empty for long. When humanity recedes, something else always flows in to fill the void. I learned this firsthand in a forgotten valley, in a place the old maps called Gray Fir Settlement. I learned that when a town dies, it doesn't always become a ghost town. Sometimes it gets a new landlord. I'm a forestry surveyor, or at least I was. My job was to patrol the deep backcountry of the national park, mapping trails, monitoring forest health, and inspecting the dozens of old homesteads and settlements that lie rotting in the woods. It was mostly routine checking for structural hazards, making sure no lost hikers had taken up residence. So when I got the assignment to survey Gray Fir, I treated it like any other. It was a Depression-era logging town, abandoned almost overnight. In the late 1930s, the official story was that the timber company went bust, but there were whispers in the local histories, footnotes about a string of strange disappearances and unusual animal activity just before the exodus. I dismissed it as folklore. I was a practical man, comfortable in the wilderness, and I knew what a bear or a mountain lion could do. I wasn't afraid of old stories. I should have been. The hike into the valley took a full day. The settlement was so remote that the trail had been reclaimed by nature decades ago. As I descended into the valley proper, the first thing I noticed was the silence. It was a deep, unnatural quiet. No birdsong, no chattering squirrels, not even the buzz of insects. The entire valley seemed to be holding its breath. It was the kind of silence that signals the presence of a large predator. Gray Fir was a skeleton picked clean. A dozen or so log cabins and a larger company store sagged into the earth, their roofs collapsing under the weight of moss. As I began my survey, I started seeing the marks on the doorframes of the cabins and on the ancient fir trees surrounding the clearing. There were deep gouges in the wood. They weren't the chaotic scratches of a bear sharpening its claws. These were precise, deliberate, 3 deep, parallel lines intersected by a fourth, forming a strange, symbol-like pattern. It was on almost every structure. It felt territorial. I pushed open the door to what looked like the foreman's cabin. Inside, the destruction was absolute. A heavy iron bed frame was bent in half. A cast iron stove was torn from its chimney and thrown across the room. I've seen what a grizzly can do to a campsite. This was different. This was rage, combined with a strength that was hard to comprehend. I backed out slowly, my hand resting on the handle of the hatchet at my belt. My unease grew as dusk began to bleed through the canopy. I made the decision to camp in the relative open of the town's central clearing, building a small, contained fire. As the last of the light died, the sounds began. It started as a faint clicking from the deep woods to my left, a dry, sharp sound, like a pebble being struck against bone. A moment later, an identical sound answered from my right. Then, From the darkness directly in front of me, a new sound emerged. It was a high-pitched, chittering shriek, a horrifying mix of a bat's cry and a camera shutter. It echoed off the silent cabins, and I realized with a surge of ice-cold dread that I was in a place that had already been claimed. I wasn't a surveyor. I was a trespasser. My training kicked in over the panic. I doused my fire immediately, plunging the clearing into near total darkness. The clicking grew louder, closer. It was coming from multiple directions, a coordinated hunting sound. I grabbed my pack and ran for the most defensible structure I could see, the old blacksmith's forge. It was the only building made of stone. I slammed the heavy oak door shut and dropped the thick iron bar into its brace. The forge was pitch black inside, smelling of ancient coal and rust. I didn't dare use my flashlight. I sank to the floor, my back against the cold stone, and listened. The clicking was just outside now. I could hear soft, heavy footsteps crunching on the gravel, moving with a gait that was wrong. It wasn't the two-step of a man or the four-step of an animal. It was a skittering, uneven rhythm, something immense, and heavy pressed against the door, testing it, making the wood groan. Then came a deafening bang as something slammed its weight into it. Dust rained down from the mortar. A wave of primal terror washed over me. I crawled to the side wall, where a few stones had crumbled away, creating a small crack to the outside. Peering through, my heart hammered against my ribs. I couldn't see the whole creature, only parts of it illuminated by faint moonlight. A long pale limb, jointed like a spider's leg, scraped against the stone. A patch of what looked like damp, gray skin stretched taut over a skeletal frame. The thing was tall, impossibly so, and it moved with a jerky, unnatural grace. And there were more of them. I could hear them circling the forge, communicating in those awful, intelligent clicks. They weren't trying to break the door down with brute force anymore. They were scraping at the walls, testing for weakness, patient and methodical. I spent the entire night huddled in that stone box, listening to the architects of my own tomb. Just before the first hint of dawn, as suddenly as they had started, the sound stopped. The silence that rushed back in was just as terrifying. I waited, every muscle screaming, for what felt like hours. Finally, trembling, I lifted the iron bar and eased the door open. The clearing was empty. The ground was covered in deep, tracks that looked unnervingly like a bird's, but from a bird that would have stood 10 feet tall. I didn't wait to investigate further. I ran. I ran harder than I have ever run in my life, and I didn't stop until the awful silence of the valley was replaced by the beautiful, ordinary sound of bird song. My final report was a lie. I listed Grey Fir Settlement as dangerously unstable due to erosion. I recommended the entire valley be sealed off permanently. I never told anyone what I saw, but some nights, I wake up sweating, the memory of that sound, that dry, bony clicking echoing in my mind. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It was the sound of a replacement,